Alright, hello everybody, Michael here. We are here for an episode of Deck Doctor. Just a little fun little thing I'm doing. If you guys didn't see the video about it, it's just a time where people can come to me with their decks and ask for advice here and there, and hopefully I can help them out. Just ask them just anything about the deck, if they need improvements on it, how they can make it a little bit more FNM viable. This is going to be strictly for standard. Apologies for everyone who has decks in Commander or something like that, but I am only familiar with mostly cards in standard, so that's one of the reasons why I'm sticking to standard. Anyways, this is for Matthew RPG 9355. He came to me with his blue-black control / mill deck. Now, milling's a little bit of a risky type win condition. It's definitely not competitive, and it's definitely hard to sort of play because it's definitely luck based as well. Because you may mill them. You may mill their good cards, you just may mill them and they end up getting their good cards because you milled them. I just find it's not a reliable win condition, but hey, it's definitely a fun way to play. I'll definitely give it that. And, his layout isn't bad. I think he needs to focus a little bit more on milling and less on his Aetherling win condition. His Aetherling is his primary win condition, apparently, but I think if you're going to be milling someone, it's sort of all or nothing, in my opinion. You definitely have to focus on that strategy and really play around it. And when you're playing stuff like Ashiok and Jaces, I think the best way is to sort of just have enough removal and enough ways to counter to protect Ashiok and stuff like that. Because Ashiok by itself is just a really strong card in a milling strategy because it +2s. It doesn't just +1. You can play your opponent's creatures once you exile them, and so you can create your own threats. It's 3 mana, so you can get it out really early in the game, and you can start creating a threat for them to have to deal with. That combined into getting them up to a point where you can mind grind them for a lot of land. One trick I found is to just sort of count and see how many lands you've milled them, as well as how many lands they've actually played. Then you can get a feel for how much should you pay for mind grind to actually get a decent amount of, or possibly get a decent amount out of their deck, or possibly just mill them out. For example, most aggro decks are only running, possibly 22, 23 lands, or maybe even less. So once you get to a certain point, like maybe 17 lands, or once they've, played some lands and you've milled them for some lands, so let's say they have 7 lands on the field and you've milled them for 10 lands, they possibly only have 6 or so land left in their deck. So you can mind grind for 6, and then that'll possibly bring them down to, nothing, and you can just finish them off with Ashiok or Jace, or it'll at least get out a really, really nice chunk of their deck. So that's sort of how you can sort of estimate on how much you should actually mind grind, rather than just sort of throwing mind grinds out there willy-nilly and hopefully you get something good. His instances I thought were alright. I think running some Dimir Charms wouldn't be a bad idea. Dimir Charm I just think would be nice in conjunction with something like Ashiok, because it has some relevant abilities. I mean, you can counter sorcery spells. That's all right, but you have other spells for that. You can destroy target creature with power 2 or less, so you can get rid of stuff like Nightveil Spectre, because Ultimate Price and just Doom Blades don't touch Nightveil Spectres. So having that extra option open to you is always nice for just specific creatures or early threats that you need to get rid of early on. But the last one I think is pretty interesting. One way you could use it with Ashiok is for those of you who don't know what Dimir Charm does, the last mode of Dimir Charm is look at the top 3 cards of target player's library, then put 1 back and the rest into that player's graveyard. So you can mill for 2 essentially, and then you're essentially scrying their deck for 3, but instead of putting 2 cards on the bottom of their library, you put it in the graveyard, which is goes with milling. But the one way I think would be interesting to use it with Ashiok is because Ashiok can actually play creature cards that he's exiled off of your opponent's library. So how this can work is, let's say you have Ashiok out and you have some mana up for Dimir Charm. At the end step of your opponent's turn, you can Dimir Charm and then look at the top 3 cards of their library, put 1 back and the rest in their graveyard. What this opens up to you is, in those 3 cards, you're bound to get a monster, or you're bound to get a creature, unless they're playing something like blue-white control, where they're going to have like 2 creatures at most. But generally, there's a lot more creature-based decks out there, and I think they're going to get a little bit more prevalent. So having the option to look at those top 3 cards of your opponent's library and then find a creature that you want to play, place it back on top of their library, and then the rest in their graveyard. And then, since you're playing it on their end step, it's your turn right away, where you can then exile the top 3 cards of your opponent's library, and you'll know for sure you'll pull that one creature you've already set up, and possibly more. So it's really nice in sort of setting up his -X. His -X is really nice because you can play your opponent's creatures without having to worry about mana type. You can just pay converted mana cost. So exiling something like I don't know, a Desecration Demon, like that would be really, really strong. It'd produce another threat for you, like another way to block and protect Ashiok. Like, you're not worried about beating your opponent down with creatures, you're worried about milling them. So at least Desecration Demon gives them another threat they have to worry about. So you can Dimir Charm, if you're playing against mono black or something like that, and then put that Desecration Demon on top of the deck, and then following their turn you can Ashiok, get that Desecration Demon for yourself, and then the turn after that you can play it for 4 loyalty. And it's really nice that Ashiok has a +2 rather than just a +1, so he can easily get out of range of a lot of burn spells and stuff like that. So that's one reason why I like playing Ashiok. And Ashiok itself is just an effective way to mill your opponent out, and unless they have an answer for it, you generally can just protect Ashiok with all your removal. And that sort of brings us to the other planeswalkers. So you're running Jace, Architect of Thought, and Jace, Memory Adept. I would opt to choosing one or the other. I find Jace, Memory Adept would be a little bit more of an overkill card in a mill strategy. I think a little bit of more of a controlled mill strategy rather than just a really aggressive, just throw mill cards out there and hope you mill them before they kill you type thing. I think controlling the board and just milling them out slowly and grinding that mill out is a little bit more effective, because otherwise they could just end up, killing you before you even mill them out, even if you are just playing a straight mill strategy and throwing, Tome Scours or something like that. I don't know. But Jace, Memory Adept, mills them still, but I think Jace, Architect of Thought is just the better option here. It's 1 less mana. You also get the benefit of its other abilities, and I think they're just a little bit more prevalent, especially in a control strategy. His +1 protects your guy, protects your planeswalkers. It protects you. It definitely nullifies 1/1 tokens, just outright throws out their damage. His -2 is just good for card draw. You definitely need card draw in a control deck, and you definitely want to keep pulling those answers out there. His -8's alright, but I mean, generally you're going to be -2ing or +1ing him mainly. And then, so Aetherling, I think you should just cut out. I think just focusing, on a sort of mill strategy. I think milling is the type of thing where you sort of have to go all or nothing. I don't see milling working unless you're sort of devoted to that strategy. And, stuff like Ashiok, you can definitely devote to it and still sort of put out some threats with his -X at some points. And, they have to deal with it, or at least not deal damage to you or your planeswalker, so it's a way to protect them. Aetherling, you're essentially playing it as a 7-drop. I think just by that point, you should either be close to milling them out, or you should at least be well on your way to with something like Mind Grind. And you should also, it's just nice having that mana open. That 7 mana could be used to be holding more removal up if you need it, or something like that. So I don't think Aetherling mixing with milling is just the best way to go. I think you should just devote to milling. I think it's something that you have to sort of go all the way with. Otherwise, it'll be sort of half-assed, and it won't work out the way you want it to. Land count, I'd probably up it to at least 23 or possibly 24 lands. I think just because you're playing control strategy, you definitely want that land. You definitely need that land up. You definitely want as much land as you can get. You should be playing one pretty much every single turn, and just being able to have those answers open for when you need them, because you definitely want to control the board. Definitely want to keep threats off the board when you need to. Thoughtseize, I think, is still a nice way to sort of interact with Dimir Charm as well, but it's nice to have it out earlier. So I think running 4 Thoughtseizes, or at least 3 of, is sort of the way to go. Running 2 of, I think you're not going to see it often enough that'll be useful, and you might possibly just getting it you possibly might just end up getting it sort of later in the game when it's not as prevalent and not as much of a threat, and you could potentially play it at a point where, you know, they only have one or two cards or potentially no cards in their hand because they've played out their hand, and it's just lost most of its value that way. So I think running 3 or 4 at least is the best way to go. This also sort of works well with Dimir Charm, actually, because you can turn 1 Thoughtseize then, and then turn 2, you know, depending on what they have in their hand, you can definitely sort of punish them if they've pulled a risky hand. So Thoughtseize turn 1, you can get rid of their main threat, or at least you know, a possible ramping card, you know, Elvish Mystic or something, if that's the only option. And you know, if you notice, if they took a risky hand, something like a 1-lander or something like that, then you know that they're going to be looking for those lands and hoping they draw those lands. Well, how this interacts well with Dimir Charm is you can actually use Dimir Charm then turn 2, and then look at the top 3 cards of their library, see if they are going to be pulling any lands. And because Dimir Charm isn't, you know, only put non-land cards into the graveyard, you can throw those lands into the graveyard and just put, you know, 1 creature that they can't play on top of their deck that slows them down a turn, and this also potentially screws them for more land in the future. So I thought that was one interesting way you could sort of use these cards, is to sort of ruin their game plan with Thoughtseize, as well as just further hinder that game plan with Dimir Charm, and also just sort of mill them out too is always nice. You know, you want, if that's going to be your main win condition, you want to mill them out as much as you can. Pilfer Red Plans, this is one card I noticed that I don't think you need, really. I would prefer something running like Underworld Connections. I like Underworld Connections a little bit better, because in the long run, you know, milling them and grinding them out with Ashiok is going to be a little bit of a longer game, and in the long run, Underworld Connections is going to be able to pull you more cards and just be a lot more pliable, in my opinion. You know, you are milling them for 2, but you know, you're playing the card for the card draw, and if that's the case, you're better off running something like Divination or Underworld Connections for card draw. In my opinion, I don't know. Probably see what other people think of it, but I don't think Pilfered Plans is something that you sort of need to put in this deck. I would rather something have like Underworld Connections. Mind Grind, 3 of I think is fine. You know, I think it is going to be a sort of a possible win condition, because again, like I mentioned before, you can sort of estimate on how much you need a Mind Grind for to mill out the rest of their land and possibly their deck. So that, in conjunction with Ashiok, I think is enough milling needed. So I think keeping 3 of is just fine. You'll see it when you need to see it. And, you know, in the mid game, if you have the mana open to, you can Mind Grind them for 3 or 4 and possibly mill out a good chunk of their deck. But I definitely would definitely run at least 2, just in case your first one gets countered or something like that. I would definitely run at least 3 Ashioks, possibly even 4. Main reason is because you definitely want it in your early turns. It only being 3 mana, you can get it out early, and as early as possible is something you want Ashiok out, because you want to start milling them. You want to start getting those threats out of their deck, and possibly more threats you can play with Ashiok in the future. Psychic Strike is, you know, it's a solid counter. It's just another counter you can have. I think running other counters would be a little bit better. You know, even something like Syncopate, I think, might work a little bit better. It's a little bit more pliable, and you know, I don't know. I think Syncopate is just a much better card in this situation. I mean, I like it a little bit more than Psychic Strike, but I mean, I don't know. There might be arguments for either. I personally like Syncopate better, but you are milling them for 2 with Psychic Strike. But I think that's what you're paying a little bit extra for. It is just a counter spell, and milling isn't, you know, cards like this and cards like Pilfered Plans that have sort of that extra milling option to them, I don't think is needed even in a milling deck, because, you know, there's other cards out there that do the similar thing without the milling part of it, but they're a little bit more valued and there's a little bit more ways you can use them. Because playing around Ashiok is playing around Ashiok and Jace, and protecting those two planeswalkers is, I think, the best way to go. And you can essentially grind out a deck with Mind Grind and Ashiok, just those two cards. As long as you can protect Ashiok, you can. It's a really, really strong threat in a milling strategy. And so just having those better counter cards out there is a little bit nice. Even running something like Aetherize, or something like what's it called? Cyclonic Rift, I actually think would be better replacement for Psychic Strike. Or even replacing Disperse with Cyclonic Rift would be another option as well. Cyclonic Rift is just a better version of Disperse, so you still get that option to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, but Cyclonic Rift, later on in the game, you have the option of overloading it, so you can potentially wipe their whole board, and it'll definitely slow down their turns, and by that point, they won't be able to come back, because you'll be close enough you can mill them out with a Mind Grind or something like that, or just finish milling them out with Ashiok. So, I definitely would recommend replacing Disperse with something like Cyclonic Rift. Dissolve is just solid counter card. Having the addition of Scry is always nice. Doomblades, I don't know about Doomblading as a main board. Maybe just keeping one of is nice. I prefer stuff like Hero's Downfalls to interact with at least their planeswalkers if they have any, as well as just a solid, destroy anything type card. Doomblade, especially with mono black so prevalent in standard right now, I think just including one of is nice, and possibly running more in the sideboard. I got mixed up there. I was thinking Dark Betrayal. But even Doomblade, because it's restrictive removal, I think just running one of is nice, and having just better removal out there is just a much better option, such as Hero's Downfall. Essence Scatter, even running more Essence Scatters, I think is nice. Keeping their threats off the board is sort of paramount. You could probably mainboard 3 of them, I would say, and you can easily just sort of switch those out for negates if they aren't running very, very hard creature strategy. I don't know why those are open. Anyways, Far Away I think is a solid card. Definitely deals with really aggressive stuff that you can't deal with, such as Pack Rat. It deals really well with Pack Rat. I really like Far and Away against Pack Rat. But yeah, just I think keeping 3 of is just fine for this as well. You can bounce stuff if you need to, or you can make them sacrifice a creature. Running Devour Fleshes actually wouldn't be a bad idea, even in place of something like Doomblade, I think, or Ultimate Price. I think making room through Pilfered Plans, taking out the Jace Memory Adept, Psychic Strike, making room for stuff like Hero's Downfall, a little bit more removal, Underworld Connections for some better card draw, gets maybe 1 or 2 more Thoughtseizes in, get some Dimir Charms in. I think that would work better because, again, I think devoting yourself to a mill strategy would overall be a little bit better than adding something like Aetherling in and playing that as a win condition with a mill secondary. But sideboard, I'm still not too experienced with sideboarding, especially for something like a mill deck. Milling is something I haven't experimented with, and it's still something I'm sort of looking to experiment with, but I just haven't had the chance to. So I don't really know exactly what the best option to sideboard. And I will say that running both Shrivel and Illness in the ranks, I think, is just not really needed. I would, I'm sure you're running those for token decks, but I think even just running something like Aetherize or something like that is nice, because bouncing tokens removes them as well, essentially. But yeah, that's pretty much what I think about the deck. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you've gotten something out of it at least, whether it be if I've actually helped you or not. That can probably be argued. I'm not too familiar with milling, but I think if you are going to be going milling, even as a secondary win condition, you should probably devote yourself to it rather than playing around Aetherling and mixing and milling to play around Aetherling, because playing cards like Psychic Strike and Pilfered Plans, I just think they're not very good cards, even in a milling strategy. I think it's just one of those situations where there's just better cards out there to play. For example, Cyclonic Rift in place of Disperse. They are going to be costing a little bit more, but if you want your deck to at least be solid, you're going to have to pay for those better cards. And milling is something that's already not very effective in general. So you're going to have to go that little extra mile to actually get those cards to at least have a chance of making it, playable. So, but yeah, definitely enjoyed looking at this deck. It definitely was one of the sort of the better milling decks I've seen, that's for sure. At least a good starting point. But I hope you got something out of it. I hope everyone else enjoyed watching this, and definitely keep sending me your decks. I definitely enjoy doing these, and I hope to do some more in the future. So thanks a lot, and again, thank you to Master RPG. I think that was your name. Matthew RPG, sorry. Matthew RPG 9355. Again, thank you very much for sending me your deck, and definitely send me an update in the future to see how things are going. Or if you've playtested this and I'm absolutely wrong on how it works, then let me know. I'll definitely love to take a look at it or possibly try it out for myself. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll definitely talk to you guys later. Have a great day.